All right. We are live on Facebook. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining on this session here today. I'm Jen Fine. I'm co-founder and CEO of YouLi, and we are the best platform for organizing group trips. And we think we're the best platform for preparing your travelers for the adventure that they're about to have. So I want to introduce to you our panelists today to talk about a very important topic, which is duty of care. It's a big topic. Obviously, risk management has always been important when you're running adventure travel in particular, and now kind of any trip at the moment is kind of an adventure. So I think everyone is really keen to learn how to properly manage the risk of running travel in this new era. So we have with us Elinor Fish from Wanderwell. Erin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Jen and Vika and Jeff. I'm Elinor Fish. I am in lovely, glorious Portland, Oregon in the USA. And actually, I wish I was outside right now, but there's a dog barking, so I didn't want it to interrupt. And I'm with Wanderwell. We are a travel insurance agency, certified B Corp, 1% for the Planet Business Member, and Transformational Travel Council ally and ambassador. And Jen and Vika and I have known each other for a few years, and just have a lot of values alignment, and we've had a few of these experiences online too. And I'm really happy and honored to be here along with Katie. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome, Erin. Thank you. I always love your perspective on the insurance side of things. We're going to introduce Katie Broadhurst, who's been on our webinars before. Katie, would you like to tell us your specialty?
Yeah, sure. Thanks again for having me. So hi, everybody. I'm Katie, and I'm an online business manager, presently based in Canada. And yeah, my expertise really is in sort of the back end and the operations around, I guess, understanding the sort of the holistic back end of the travel business, and little pieces from my days out in the field as an adventure guide, and the delivering the safety briefings, and helping clients get through the adventure all the way into the back end of helping businesses find commercial liability insurance, and make sure that business policies and best practices are developed through risk management planning and pieces like that. So excited to be here and to share some of my learnings over the last decade plus.
So Katie, I hear you have a definition for us of duty of care. Would you like to share that with us?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. This is out of a textbook that I have on the topic. So duty of care comes from negligence law, and it's referring to the responsibility that one party has to take reasonable care, right, for the protection of another party. So as tour operators, guides, adventure travel businesses, travel agents, whatever you label yourself as, when a traveler opts into coming and doing an adventure with you, you are now responsible for overseeing that duty of care in a reasonable way. And what is reasonable, unfortunately, is always a little bit of a moving target, right? And as you've seen in the last 2 years, there are now new levels of reasonability that would be considered duty of care. And I'm excited to be hearing all about, what Erin has to say on how that, is intertwined with the travel insurance side of things.
Well, yeah, so this topic is interesting. The reason why we have both Erin and Katie covering this is because Katie's kind of coming at this from a sort of operational mindset. How do you prepare your travelers? How do you structure your product so that you're taking the right people on these experiences with you? So there's a process and a sort of a mindset to doing that, right? But then there's the insurance side of things, because no matter how much you prepare your travelers or your business, things can go wrong, and that's where insurance steps in. And so Erin, before we were talking a bit about the assumption of risk. So do you want to kind of talk a little bit about the assumption of risk, both for the travel businesses, but also for the travelers, and how there's insurance for both sides of that?
Yeah, sure. I think what's important to understand is that there are many stakeholders in involved in every trip that we plan, every trip that we go on. Oftentimes, travel retailers, as we refer in the insurance industry to travel planners, let's say, as a travel retailer. Even a tour operator can be considered a travel retailer. The insurance industry tends to use that language. And let's actually narrow that down. Let's just say that you're a travel planner and you're offering trips, and you're offering, let's say, trip to Costa Rica. This is 8 days, yoga, surfing. Maybe it's Taboti surf and yoga, and you know that not only are you planning the trip, but you're planning the trip with travelers who are clearly stakeholders in this process, with your own company who's clearly a stakeholder in the process, and then also with tour operators. And sometimes the money, the funds come from the traveler, your customer, to you, and then you have to then work with your vendors. And there can be multiple stakeholders, including the community, including the ecosystem in the area you're in. So I think that a good way to think about duty of care in general is to consider all stakeholders. And then if you consider yourself and your customers, maybe like 1 degree on each side of you, the primary stakeholders, then there is a good perspective to take into account when we're trying to set proper expectations, like what Katie is best at, and then to also protect yourself and your customers. So when you say assumption of risk, I'll kind of go to that. These days, there is this crazy assumption of risk, which we're all itching, right? We have so many, even us as in the travel industry, or people, if your profession is to plan travel, we're itching ourselves to get out and travel. And to understand at the same time, though, that there is an assumption of risk. This trip might not happen involuntarily, like just out of our control. How can we provide the proper resources and tools to make our travelers whole and to give them peace of mind and keep them safe? How can we protect our own company and even our vendors, the other stakeholders, against the risk of this trip perhaps not happening? And it's tough. It's not an easy answer. In fact, there are probably in most cases many answers. I can delve
So that
deeper
was one
into
of
the
the
risk in travel insurance, because that's what we focus on, but I'll say that for a few minutes from now.
Yeah, so I think that was actually one of the questions that we wanted to cover is, so can I as a travel retailer require my travelers to purchase a specific insurance policy or to purchase travel insurance at all? Like, is that something I'm allowed to require of my travelers?
It is, from a broader scope, it's nation specific. Right. So in the United States, if you're a citizen of the United States and or a resident of the United States, if you live here and this is your originating country for your trip, yes, your travel planner can require you to show proof of travel insurance, even to set the limits, the minimum limits. But to do so compliantly, you cannot require the traveler to purchase from a specific company. You have to give that traveler the liberty or the choice, as long as they meet the very defined limitations or the minimum requirements to be set in that travel insurance plan. And you have to show proof of it. Countries can do it too. I mean, Ecuador and Costa Rica have been the most, outwardly visible countries that are doing that. The exception to that rule, where you can't require them to go with one company, is you as a travel planner can actually hold the certificate. So if you hold the insurance, for example, we're working with a company right now that's a large nonprofit organization. They have up to 10,000 travelers a year. What they want to do is they want to say, if you go on one of our trips, your travel insurance is included. But even though the insured is the traveler, the holder of the insurance policy is the company. And so they're saying that we've got you covered. They went duty of care extreme. They went, with a very, very high.
And so just to make sure I'm understanding that correctly, because what you said before is you can't mandate that it's through a certain provider. So could one of those travelers say, yeah, but I want to buy my insurance somewhere else and I want a discount off my trip because I'm not going to buy it from your plan?
I mean, we're going to get kind of into some stuff that is a little boring on the compliance side with in the US at least, but the part of that compliance, which almost seems it seems like it's a little against being compliant because it isn't as transparent. Part of that is that if you have an embedded trip insurance policy, like I just described, you as the travel planner are not allowed to tell the traveler how much that insurance costs. It's just part of the overall trip cost. I'm not always comfortable with that, but it is a compliance. It is quite standard in insurance compliance. And it also can depend on the state in which the policy is held. So if the organization is based in California, it might be a different law than in New York.
So how big would you have to be before that would make sense to provide that kind of like embedded policy?
The smallest one I've seen is 200, maybe a little less than 200 travelers.
200 travelers a year?
Yes, 200 travelers a year. But I want to explain, I hope I'm keeping us on topic here. There is a significant advantage to doing it this way. I'm not promoting it. It's not always the best avenue to take, but the significant advantage to doing something like that is it's consistent. And so you have the same emergency phone numbers, the same way to advocate for every one of your participants, every one of them. And you're establishing a relationship. B, use an economy of scale and immediately the premiums go way down. So you can't use it as a vehicle to actually necessarily make more profit on your trip. But that's the problem I have sometimes with this compliance thing, where you're not allowed to talk about the cost of the insurance. But the two main advantages are consistency, like easy advocacy, and then also using economies of scale to drive down the insurance premium.
So I'm kind of hearing from you.
You care in a way.
Right. And so I think to kind of meet your duty of care, you can either just require that they purchase travel insurance and either recommend a provider or not, but at least tell them you need this minimum level of coverage. So for example, if you're going into shark infested waters, which was one of our examples from Ben. So he would need to make sure that when they purchase travel insurance that they have a clause for, includes being, in shark infested waters. Is that an option, Erin? Just out of curiosity, like when you, on your website, when you're checking out, can you just like add that on to the policy?
It depends on the policies. I haven't seen swimming in shark and I also infested. I mean, it's just swimming in salt water. I have this thing, my daughter even asked me like, hey dad, are there sharks in the water? I'm like, there's a really good way to tell. Dip your finger in the water, taste it. And she'll do it. I'm like, is it salty? Yes. Okay, there's sharks in the water. Like there's another assumption of risk too. We're swimming in the water, but I haven't seen an insurance policy that actually has a defined hazard as, or like an extreme sport as swimming with sharks. So there's probably some more work that
I'm sort of making this
insurance for that.
I'm making this in jest because of course, a lot of our clients are running experiences that kind of go outside the norm. And if you just go to like a World Nomads website and have people purchase insurance, they may or may not be getting the right level of insurance for the experience that you're offering. And so, hence why working with somebody like Erin or, an insurance broker to make sure that you're properly articulating the minimum requirements. And then if you can go so far as to do an embedded policy, I see Priscilla is asking, ooh, how do I do this? That's probably a whole nother topic, but I think the short answer is contact a broker to set up an embedded policy. Is that the right answer for that?
Not necessarily. I mean, embedded policy it's just worth talking to a company and making sure we do it right. A lot of embedded policies we will customize. We can create them based on their experience. So, but then again, most adults are. It also depends on how much of your trip you're booking. An embedded policy is good for companies who are actually when you pay as a traveler, when you pay the travel retailer, you're paying them to do everything. The flights, the like A to Z, every part of the trip. Otherwise, you're looking at maybe if you have a lot of volume, we could do custom retail plans, or we can make a custom experience. I think the real key is to know these days, is there enough travel medical insurance in your policy? Is it a primary plan? Meaning that, is it primary or is it secondary to your domestic health insurance? Because you could come back with a medical claim, and imagine if you were in a secondary plan, which is very possible and most likely, the claims examiner is going to say, oh, go file a claim with your domestic carrier first, then we'll cover whatever they don't. And then make sure it has emergency medical transportation or evacuation. And then the last thing is, what is the COVID coverage? Make sure that that COVID-19 is treated the same as any other illness, meaning that your medical expenses, if you contract COVID while you're on your trip and you need treatment, that you're covered under the travel insurance. At the same time, if you contract COVID and you're diagnosed with it and you need treatment and that prevents you from going on your trip, same thing with a travel companion or a family member that's not traveling with you, and you're prevented from going on the trip and you have the proper documentation from a doctor that says you should not be traveling, that should be covered. I don't know of a policy in the world that will cover COVID as a pandemic. It is a hurricane. It is here. It is named. And so there's that assumption of risk, unless you have cancellation for any reason.
Can you just talk through that really quickly? You said it is a hurricane. That means something specifically in the insurance world, right? It's a known risk, right?
Yes. So it's interesting. Who's on the call? Who's in Barbados?
Listial.
Yeah, Listial. So you're in Barbados, right? You're in Hurricane Alley, and let's say that let's say any one of us, like we planned a trip 6 months ago. We're going to Barbados, middle of August, and you forget to buy insurance. Well, if you are going in 2 weeks, let's say, so the end of August, and you just realize that, forbid, but a hurricane has been forecasted, mainly that means named, if it's a hurricane. If a hurricane's been forecasted to hit right when you go there, you can still buy insurance for that trip, but now that is a defined hazard. It's a known event. And so your insurance will cover you comprehensively for so many hazards, but not for that hurricane, because it's a known event. And so you're now you bought insurance under the assumption of risk. If you had bought it before it was forecasted, you had been covered for that event. Because it is a defined hazard in a policy. It should be. So essentially, a lot of insurance plans did not cover pandemics, but a few handfuls did. And if you had purchased one of those policies prior to COVID and you did not get reimbursed by your travel planner, you could have filed a claim and got 100% back. Nowadays, basically COVID is a named hurricane and we're still in it.
And so you can't buy, like, as a traveler, I can't buy travel insurance to protect against, like, let's say I book a trip to Iceland and then they change they implement a vaccination requirement, and I don't comply with that. So if I've purchased travel insurance prior to them implementing that rule, will I be able to claim back because I have to cancel my trip because I'm not allowed in anymore?
No, probably not. That's not payable in most cases, because that is a travel restriction. It's a travel restriction due to COVID. So, travel restrictions, if an airline says we're not flying anymore, if a country says we can't go in, or if a travel retailer says no more, we have to cancel this trip. Or if you just don't want to be around a bunch of people who might have COVID, fear of travel. Those are travel restrictions or reasons outside of the categories in almost all cases for travel insurance plans. If you are lucky enough to live in a state in the United States, not all countries allow cancel for any reason coverage, like an upgrade. The United States does. 48 states do. 2 states don't. They just don't allow their residents to buy travel insurance that has cancel for any reason. But if you're in those other 48 states, you should be able to, with most carriers, buy a policy and upgrade to cancel for any reason. You pay more and you can get 75% back if you cancel for an otherwise non-covered reason. And you have to meet very strict criteria. Like, obviously, you have to live in the right state. You have to purchase your trip insurance policy within a certain amount of days for making your initial trip payment.
Right.
You have to insure the entire cost of your trip, not just a portion. You have to cancel 2 days or more before you depart. There's a whole bunch of stuff to make them get out of paying you. So we just want to set the proper expectations for all of
So as part of the duty of care, it's like you probably do want to at least require your travelers to get some kind of travel insurance. And then also part of your duty of care is making it clear what's the kind of minimum there. And so saying things like, you should be sure and cover the entire cost of it. You should be sure to purchase it within 2 weeks of your first payment to make sure that you're as covered as possible. So all that kind of information should be conveyed to them very soon after booking with you or before booking with you.
I think the easiest way to think about it is the sooner you purchase a travel insurance policy in relation to the date you made your initial payment of any kind for that trip, the more it will cover. And usually within 10 days, great. That's your really choice period to do it, because you'll have extra coverage for terror events or for carrier default, like if a company goes out of business or files bankruptcy, or pre-existing conditions, or the option to upgrade to cancel for any reason. Some companies don't even offer any of those. So you want to look into it, because this is insurance. It's meant to be confusing. Where there's confusion, there's and that's tough. That's why we want to try to make it really easy to understand everything, even though that's very difficult to do.
Right. And so it's sort of setting the right expectations up front with your travelers to purchase the right kind of coverage for them. But let's talk a little bit in terms of covering the business side of it. So we've talked a lot about travel insurance for the travelers, so they can only get what they can get, right? So they can't get protection for COVID cancellations. They most of the time won't get canceled for any reason coverage. So let's say, a friend of mine was telling me a story of having gone on a trip, and the customer just got there and freaked out and didn't feel safe, and feels like they should be able to say that they're not going to pay for that part of the trip. So what's a business supposed to do? Are they able to insure themselves against that situation?
When it comes to business lines of coverage, Katie, I'd love to hear, you've always had a lot of wise things to say about this with your experience. There are so many ways to kind of paint the canvas of what your coverage is. It can be more customizable in some ways. And what I found is, especially over the last year and a half, is that most companies are just underinsured. And part of it is actually not even related to insurance. Part of it is just, and we started, Jen and Vika, maybe like a year ago, we talked about this a lot on one of these sessions, where kind of the advice that we all came up with together is, let's rethink the agreements that we have with our tour operators. Let's think about us as being all in one ecosystem together. If I've already paid, if I promised you this much money, but we can't go, we want to still have our relationship with you in the future. So let's work this out so we don't necessarily have to pay you now, because we should all be able to be on a level playing field. It's hard to be equitable, especially across different countries, but that has nothing to do with insurance. It's just let's talk about this and try to reassess our agreements. And then when it comes to insurance, really, I think it has a lot to do with finding an industry solution. Mike Scheibel, who's actually now on the call, Mike and I have been working on a solution based on some of these conversations that we've all been having over the past year. And I'm excited to talk about it in a couple of weeks. I think we're going to be ready to talk about it. But I think we found a way to kind of galvanize the travel retailer community and use our economy of scale and use our collective power to work with insurance companies to have very equitable and consistent benefits to keep the entire industry more stable and resilient in situations like this. And then Katie, I want to hear more about, your experiences with the insurance part of this on business lines. And you brought up interruption as well.
Yeah, so just jumping back to Jen's question around, the traveler was unhappy and felt unsafe on the trip. There's no insurance that comes to mind or anything that I've ever heard that is going to cover for that event. That event is a communication breakdown somewhere in the marketing and trip preparation process, and ultimately falls onto the business to have to mitigate in whatever way they feel is appropriate, right? Which is, okay, so you're on a 10-day trip. 4 of those days are in the backcountry hiking, and the client decides to opt out of those 4 days of 10, right? So you try to work, what I would do anyways, would be to try to work with the client to come up with something that feels reasonable, and see if you can meet in the middle somewhere. And so really that is something internally that you just kind of have to build in as sort of a, it's more of like a client care, customer service, cancellation policy sort of thing, right? But the reason that this client decided that they were either unsafe or didn't quite fully understand what they were opting into is because perhaps the expectations weren't either clearly defined up front, or the assumption of risk and the hazards weren't clearly presented as well. And it can be a challenging thing to convey because each and every human, right, we all have our own concept and construct in our mind about what different words and stuff mean. So if I told this group here that my favorite place to hike in Newfoundland is a extremely rugged place, right? Rugged to you, if you live in downtown New York, means something totally different than it does to me, having lived in, this particular area, right? And I rock hop boulders and climb scree slopes, and that's rugged, right? So there's a lot of language that's very challenging to describe a lot of these experiences, and because the majority of the human population actually lives in a very human constructed environment, right? They're actually very disconnected from what we would consider to be inherent risks, right? Tripping over a rock, tripping on a root, slipping on a wet surface, right? Those types of things. So we have to do our very best as guides and business owners and marketers to kind of like use what tools are available to us to communicate what those risks, hazards, and expectations should be. So using photos of maybe the gnarliest section of the trail, right, on a difficult hike would be a good way to have people look at that image and self-select. Do I think I can walk up that trail? Yes or no, right? And that's how we want to like guide our travelers through getting ready to come on the trip the whole way, from the point of seeing something on Instagram all the way to the day they show up on the trip and have that first briefing with their guide. So that's kind of that piece.
Yeah. So thinking like pulling that thread as marketers, right? So, we know Instagram is like totally realistic and we're always seeing the actual experience, right? So, I think, the point is marketers present the beautiful side. I think, Amy Greener here is saying like what looks cool on NGS TV is hot and humid and buggy in reality, right? And so what's the point? Okay, so maybe Instagram isn't where you sort of scare them with the like, you're gonna have to scale this cliff, right? Maybe like when do you transition from the like, you're gonna be on top of this mountain and get this amazing shot, to the, okay, so to get to the top of the mountain, here's what you're gonna have to do. Like, where in the marketing funnel do you introduce, is like, this is the assumption of risk that you are taking on this trip?
Yeah, so I think there's some kind of basic, easy things that can be implemented really kind of quickly. So, accurate photography and video that fully represents you know, different aspects of the trip, and framing stuff that, like, you know, the challenge of the climb is worth it for the view, right? And framing stuff that it's like about the journey, and the struggle is part of adventure travel. And get comfortable with being uncomfortable is like a motto in our sphere, right? Of living in the outdoors. Like, I know, like, Elinor runs running retreats, and like, to me, that sounds really hard because I'm not a runner, right? But if I was like motivated and I was like, okay, I'm gonna like train for this and like make it happen, I would just have to be, it's like more of a mental preparation just as much or more than it is a physical preparation in a lot of cases. Okay, so sorry, back to your question. So when do you scare them? How I've handled this before for some really big trips, which is like 10 days of horseback riding in Mongolia, certainly not a comfortable experience. And trekking to Everest Base Camp, while most reasonable people can do it, it still has its challenges. And hiking in Newfoundland, I keep coming back to because it's actually just rugged. It's so rough. So visuals, we talked about graphics, video, bringing them in, screening them into the trip. So making sure that at their point of booking, either just before or just after the deposit, you're asking them a bunch of questions that's going to help you understand their level of ability, a little bit about mental fortitude and different, you know, aspects that you can kind of weave in there. If there's specific skills they need to have, you know, you need to start asking those questions. Yes, a fitness screening. Yes, as Elinor is putting in the chat, exactly. Like, and putting that like level of difficulty. That's something I think also, Elinor, looking at your site, that you've done really well, where you've identified like this is like a, you know, some say beginner friendly or like easier trip. This is like an intermediate trip, and this is more advanced trip, because it just gives people like a quick way to be like, oh, like me, I'd be like, I'm only gonna look at the easy ones because I'm not a runner, right? Like that would be a clear path forward for me. And then the next thing is like having, so when I worked with Wild Women Expeditions, we used to put together these, you know, 20-page beautiful trip packages, we call them. And it was every stinking detail all about the trip, everything from like what time to arrive to like a topographic map of Grossmorn Mountain in Newfoundland with an elevation profile, with a description, right? Yeah. And like the whole darn thing, to show people, you know, what that was going to kind of look like. Yeah. But as someone has already mentioned quickly, I've skimmed in the chat, people are not reading things and they're not looking at things, and sometimes they maybe don't take it seriously, or they're over believing in their abilities, right? Because, oh, well, I hike out in New York State in the park there every weekend, so I'm a great hiker. Yes, you are, and that's awesome. But that trail is so different from this trail because that's manicured and this is not. So balance and all those things come into effect. So, so it's never a perfect science, is the reality of it. All we can do is our very best. And as we learn and we evolve, right? Like this scenario, right? This client showed up on a trip and they were unhappy. And it's like, okay, well, what got missed? What were they unclear about? And you go back and you just try to like implement those changes right away, right? Update the copy on the website, update what's included, not included on the itinerary, include a level of difficulty rating, and define the scale somewhere on your site as well. What does easy mean? What does intermediate mean, right? So that people can kind of like, yeah, just have multiple tools and multiple different ways to understand what you're telling them, and also sort of like self-select into how hard something might be. Yeah.
And I think, you know, one of the things that's really important, I think it was mentioned in one of the chats earlier, is your terms and conditions, right? So if somebody books into a level 3 running course and pays your, you know, your $500 deposit, you know, they've checked the box that says, I agree to the terms and conditions. And in those terms and conditions, it's that the deposit is non-refundable in most cases, right? Or maybe only refundable within a certain period of time. And so if, you know, if then as they go through the process of discovery and they fill out the fitness screening and whatnot, if they realize that they've been a little bit optimistic, they watch the videos, they kind of start to understand, then, you know, they should be in a place where they understand that they're not getting that deposit back. If, you know, if you set all of that up correctly, in that worst case scenario, then they decide not to go. I like what Amy has put on here. This is not Kansas talk. So he's suggesting kind of giving that on the first evening. I might suggest bringing that back, like, you know, maybe even 3 months before.
Yeah, I've done that quite a bit. Right before I left Wild Women, I was really trying to encourage, I was going live in a Facebook group that was a dedicated group per trip that we were inviting the travelers to. So it was just those women just on that one trip, those dates, 10 people. And I was going live there because this was like for Mongolia, for example. And I was going through, here's everything that's in my suitcase, right? And here's a video of riding the horses. And I was like showing what that looked like. And I was showing like how things were going to work, what the inside of a yurt looked like and all that kind of stuff. And then as I was going along on the trip, I was going live in the bigger Facebook community of everyone who's in the Wild Women group and be like, hi, I'm Katie, I'm live in Mongolia. I'm standing inside a yurt. Here's what it looks like to sleep in a yurt with 4 other people, you know, and let's go meet the horses. And oh, we have to stand back over here because we can't pat the horses in Mongolia. They're not pets. They are wild animals that literally are trained just to the point that you can barely safely ride them. So, you know, like bringing that all to like life for people, even while you're in destination, going live on your social channels or whatever, is just ongoing, both trip promotion and also like education and like risk management. And because you're talking about everything when you're doing that, right? You're talking about the culture, like the yurts are beautiful. They're actually really comfortable. But there might be there's going to be bugs everywhere because you're on a dirt floor, right? And it's those little things, hey, the bugs, the humidity, the things that we don't live with in our modern world, that tend to really get under people's skin.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, what's interesting about this conversation, there's like the things you can insure against, both as a traveler and as a business. And then there are just the things that you just sort of need to manage as part of the travel experience. And that sort of expectation setting, that's marketing, that's terms and conditions. But then it's also just being understanding, as Amy mentioned, sometimes they fall through the cracks. Like sometimes you're going to get someone who shows up and is like, what do you mean there's bugs in the rainforest? You know, and then, you know, you need to have a policy within your business, like, okay, do you allow them to leave early? Do you give them a refund? Like, how do you want to handle that? And just having that documented and having that as a policy that's communicated upfront, right?
Yeah, definitely. And all of these things that you're mentioning are kind of what builds out what we were talking about, like the ecosystem, you know, of that duty of care, because that setting those expectations, both for your travelers so they're happy with your services, but also so they can safely participate in the trip, is one little piece, you know, of the kind of bigger matrix or ecosystem when we talk about the duty of care. But those scenarios when a client is unhappy or feeling overwhelmed really come down also to selecting your local guides and your local tour operators, and that is perhaps a deeper layer that might be another topic for another time. But looking at within your risk management planning processes, you know, how you're going to select those tour operators, right? And what qualifies their local guides to be the best fit for your travelers, right? And that was something that was actually quite challenging when I worked with Wild Women. One, because in some places there's not a lot of female guides, and a few others who run a lot of women's only stuff might resonate for you. And then those, you know, female guides that were available, because of the cultural distinctions, they're often not as perhaps emotionally available to North American and Western clients as we might expect, or maybe even need them to be. So as a company representative, I found myself really fitting in to that translator role, not necessarily as a traditional translator language-wise, but sort of cultural and helping clients navigate through the struggles along the way, which was everything from, food dislikes to, yes, the physical, discomforts and the saddle sores and the broken ribs and having to call the insurance and get people evacuated to hospitals and, all that on the ground stuff too. So yeah, it's a whole thing, but I think a lot of the expectation stuff could be very well handled with some really strong local guides who are familiar with your clients and perhaps your demographic and their particular needs. And so selecting a local operator based on that can be a really helpful part of this to avoid I wasn't happy with how this was delivered.
Jenna,
yeah, absolutely.
I have something to add to this too that I've learned about recently, and it's something that YouLi as a technology solution might be interested in too, and you probably know a lot about it already, is that engaging your community, like actually creating a community forum, almost think of like Reddit within your website, and say there's different ways, right? But like imagine your actual participants, your travelers or guests, posting about their experiences. Obviously you curate it, you have to be able to, because some people could be trolling and doing, but you want to be as open as possible, allow negative and or whatever feedback it is, to talk about their experiences and leave it open to questions and comments. Like imagine, within the YouLi site, or within your company's site, and you utilize YouLi, that there's a community, and you're like, oh wow, or you were talking about the company that you had and with before, Katie, with Wild Women. What about that, having that community there where people go, I went on this trip. This is, by the way, if you don't want to be in too hot of temperatures, maybe this isn't the right trip for you. Or like, and then maybe someone else might say like, well, what time of year did you go? And you might engage in that way. You're actually getting some of your customers and guests to do some of the communication for you. And you're continuously involving and engaging your community. Another thing is, this is something that a company, Mike, who also on the phone, one of his friends and sponsors, and they're actually an affiliate of ours, does with their trips, their coast to costa. They will actually have a Q&A session prior to when you're going to put your deposit down on your trip. So you can actually come into that session and go like, well, I have questions about what's going to happen to this. Oh yeah, this sounds like the trip for me. And so you're kind of like mitigating any issues up front, and or because you may have people at that time say, this is not the right trip for me, but maybe this one is instead, because it's a little lower level, or there isn't the shark dive on this trip, but there's this dive on this trip, and whatever it might be. But then again, you're also creating that community feel. Like this is actually a kind of what YouLi is doing with these mastermind sessions, almost like having your trip mastermind sessions to set proper expectations. And you could even invite kind of alumni of your previous trips to come and speak at those.
Yeah, I think that's a really valuable point to bring up, Erin, is this like pre-trip webinar, like as part of like a trip launch, right? Imagine you just created a new trip, right? And you're going to the point of launching the trip, and on the launch date, aka the date you like open the cart for sales, you do like a live webinar all about the trip, and maybe you're interviewing like the local guide as well, right? Like involve those people. If it's a totally new trip, maybe you don't have alumni, and that's fine. So work with your local operators, right? You have people who've come on the trip before, but you're launching, for 2022 or 2023 now. Bringing in, 2 people that for sure had a kick-ass time on your adventure, and kind of like interview them, right? Like, what was the highlight of the trip for you, and why, right? And what did you not like about the trip? Was there anything that didn't really resonate with you? And let people kind of just be like open and honest. And it's a sales tool for sure, but it's also a huge risk management tool to do that. And that's something that I know like the online community does super good. Like, how many of you in the last like week have seen an ad for some kind of like free webinar? Please raise your hands or put a thumbs up in the comments, right? Like it's everywhere all the time, right? So, that's it's kind of like it's a norm. It's an okay, super accessible thing to run a webinar, and to use that as part of your trip launching process in your marketing, for sure.
Absolutely.
Great idea, Erin.
It could be a carrot too. You could say, that was a really good idea, Kate. Like this is the day we're going to launch it. But what if you only launch it? What if you give a pre-sale to the people who participated, not just like that in, but participated in that webinar, and you're like, you guys have the first 2 hours of this, and you each have your own code. It doesn't go to someone else. It goes only to you. And wow. Yeah, that'd be
cool. There you go. Offering a coupon as part of, and that can be what gets people to join the live and kind of participate. Yeah, absolutely. Just wanting to cover off a couple of questions from the chat, and also just a comment from Priscilla. I mean, talk about duty of care. She actually wouldn't book them into a resort in Mexico. She felt like it would be not an appropriate risk to take on. So I think, that's another kind of thing. It's like saying no to a customer. Like, I don't think that this trip is right for you. And, respect Priscilla for being able to sort of evaluate that risk and decide to say no. I think that's one of the hardest things as a business to be able to do. And I think finding those lines is the art of your business and of the changing times. I also saw a question here from Vanetta in terms of getting recommendations. I think this was a question for, I've lost it here. It was a question for Erin. Can you send us the specific recommendations we should require for the travel insurance for our clients? Or is it more like just send them to an expert, which I think is what Elinor was saying. She actually just refers them off rather than giving specific advice to avoid the liability there.
Elinor made a really important point, and that is that unless your company has its insurance license, then you're not licensed to advise. So you can disseminate. You can partner with an insurance company or even a firm. You can partner with anyone. We have a ton of affiliate partners, and some of those affiliate partners partner with multiple insurance plans. And it is our job to do the guidance and the advocacy. If you're not licensed to insure, you shouldn't be guiding anyone. And that actually gives you a little bit of freedom, but you can disseminate the plans and you can set the limits of the insurance, the minimum limits that you will accept. And so really it's about a partnership. If you find an insurance company or a firm that you really have synergy with, and you want to partner with them, I encourage that. And then there's a certain amount of information that you can put out on your travel insurance page just to show the importance of having travel insurance in any time. And then let the insurance company do the work. And in most cases, you should be able to get a fee or a commission, a percentage of that. It's not necessarily a commission because you get commissions when you're licensed, but it really is essentially the same thing. They just call it a fee. And you get a fee for your cross promotion, basically.
And so I do want to recommend that, so Katie's calling that a referral fee. We automatically create a book travel insurance task on all the YouLi trips, just to remind you that this is a really important thing that you should ask your travelers to do. And then we also recommend that you ask them to upload a copy of that insurance policy so that you have it on hand, because oddly enough, when they have fallen off the horse and have a broken rib, not the time that they're having the presence of mind of where's my insurance policy. So if you have that stored within the platform, then it's really easy for you to grab that and know what emergency numbers to call to get them evacuated.
Really important to know, something that's really important to know, and this happens a lot. Someone will say, oh, I bought my insurance, and they'll present it to you. So Elinor, imagine like you say, okay, we require this level of insurance, and they buy it. Let's say they buy it from us, and I'll see it. We bought this insurance, and they say, Elinor, here's what I have, and you say, great. And 2 days later, because it's a 10-day free look period, and you can get your money back, they go and cancel the insurance and get their premium back. But they showed you that they have insurance. right? So this is why countries like Costa Rica have built in now with their Ministry of Health a QR code. And when you get to their border and you get to customs and they say, show us your QR code, if you show a QR code that is expired, it will show as expired. And they'll say, sorry, you cannot enter unless you now buy this policy. So I do foresee that in the next year or two, every one of us is going to have access to be checking the QR code to make sure that that coverage is valid and that it spans the entire trip and that it meets the minimum requirements that you set.
There we go. It's a brave new world of travel.
Yeah.
Can I just quickly ask a question? Erin, you just finished your last sentence with that sets the minimum requirements. And that was what my question was about, those minimum requirements. And so now I'm confused because I thought that that was something that I, as a tour operator, would set. But then I heard folks say, no, you just pass that on to the insurance agent or the insurance company. So do I set that, or I'm working with you? Do you set that? Do we work together to set that? I feel like I need to have some place in my trip description that says, this is what I'm requiring for you of your trip insurance.
Right. You can set the expectation. We have plenty of affiliates who say we need everyone to have at least $100,000 in emergency medical, medical expense coverage. They often say something like $250,000 in emergency medical transportation, which is very common. It's way more than the average, but it's very common. That's what you find. And they'll set those two, and they'll have COVID-19 limitation. They want to make sure there's a minimum requirement that there is COVID-19 coverage for illness and for cancellation due to that illness. And also what has been pretty standard now this is what the Costa Rica set as the example, as that level, is there has to be a trip delay benefit of not only the $50,000 in medical minimum, but also $2,000 in what's called trip delay benefit due for accommodations and lodging due to quarantine. So if you have to take a test before coming back to your home country, and that test has to show negative, if it shows positive, your home country is not going to let you in. That changes. It fluctuates. Some months the countries are not doing that, but then the Delta variant is changing all that. So you want to make sure you have coverage to be able to keep yourself in that country and be able to pay towards your accommodations and lodging due to that quarantine, and then use the trip interruption benefit to get you back, to get a new flight to get back into your home country when you've tested negative.
Oh, Katie's put in a minimum requirements kind of quick summary there. And Erin, I don't know if you do feel comfortable after this call, if you want to give us kind of like a little bit of a list we could kind of mail out to people in terms of what are the levers, that they can kind of pull on or kind of set as minimum requirements. I won't put you on the spot right now, but if that's something that we can pull together, we will share that with the community. But, I think the short answer is, have a conversation with someone like Erin specifically around the kinds of trips that you run, and then come up with what you think those minimum requirements should be. And, set expectations, have the Q&As, do appropriate level setting with your marketing, and and take a look. Elinor Fish does a great job on her trip. So if you want to check out some of the Run Wild Retreat trip pages in terms of the way that she kind of presents that information, to make sure that she's getting the right kinds of customers onto the right trips. So definitely learn from those who are a little bit ahead of you on the curve. I really appreciate everyone who's come on, and especially Erin and Katie. You guys always have such useful things to say, and we always want to talk more, but we are out of time today. So thank you, everyone. And we will definitely send a recording out later so you can rewatch all your favorite parts. So please be safe in your travels, and please be empathic as you consider how to help your travelers have safe experiences with you. So thank you all for coming. See you next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.